So the Reverend Suge Goodloe is an Episcopal transitional deacon serving as deacon at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Ladue. She's a graduate of Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, and the Episcopal School of Ministry at Eden Seminary in Webster Groves. She was a member of Christ Church Cathedral for more than 25 years, where she served as head verger. And many years ago, she worked at St. Timothy's, serving in the office, trying to keep us all organized. Reverend Goodloe is a licensed preacher in the diocese for many years before being ordained. She has been often described as a prophetic preacher, and a few have described her as a rabble-rouser, a designation she wears proudly. Reverend Goodloe lives in Kirkwood with her wife, Doris, and this morning she's going to speak about the spiritual care and the Black Lives Matter movement. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. First thing I want to say is good morning and thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here. The last time I was here was during the walkabouts, during the bishop search, and it was, I think, the first time I had seen your space after it has been expanded, and it's quite lovely. And I'm sure that you will enjoy it greatly. When I was asked to speak this month, first of all, I have to say I'm quite often asked to speak during Black History Month. And I have feelings on both sides of the fence about that because, believe it or not, I have something to say the other 11 months of the year too. But it is what it is. And I see it as an opportunity to perhaps share some things that that maybe many of us and maybe not all of us think about during Black History Month. And this particular occasion, I find that there is a lot of misunderstanding about the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I'd like to speak a little bit about that today and how we might, as a Christian community, give spiritual care to people who are involved in that movement, and talk about some of the reasons why that's important. So many people see Black Lives Matter as a political movement. That is not entirely true. It was actually formed as a social movement in 2013 in direct response to George Zimmerman's acquittal after he killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. The movement is actually dedicated to fighting racism and anti-Black violence, especially in the form of legalized police brutality. The name Black Lives Matter signals condemnation of those unjust killings, particularly by police, because I think most of us know that Black people are far more likely to be killed by the police than any other group of people. So we need to, I think, keep that in mind as we have a discussion about Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter really asks that Black lives are mattered as much as anyone else's. Not that Black lives matter more than anyone else's, but that they matter as much as anyone else's. According to the Black Lives Matter website, their mission, and I'm quoting, is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. They work to improve Black lives by stopping violent acts and advocating for Black innovation, imagination, and indeed joy. So Black Lives Matter was first formed as an online movement, actually, using the hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag BLM. It was organized by 3 community organizers, Black women, Patrice Khan Colors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tameti. And again, they formed Black Lives Matter after George Zimmerman was acquitted on charges stemming from his fatal shooting of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black teenager. Zimmerman had called his neighborhood watch, saying that he thought Martin looked quote unquote suspicious. And although the police told him not to intervene and not to do anything, he followed Martin, got into an altercation with him, and shot and killed him. You may remember that Zimmerman remained free for weeks after the shooting, but was finally charged with second-degree murder and arrested after demonstrations demanded his prosecution. His trial was more than a year later. He claimed he acted in self-defense, and he was acquitted in July of 2013. This is widely perceived as a miscarriage of justice and led to further nationwide protests. The Black Lives Matter movement, expanded in 2014 after police killings of 2 unarmed Black men. There were more, but these 2 in particular, Eric Garner and Michael Brown, here in Ferguson. Garner died in New York after being accused of selling cigarettes, and a white police officer, executed an illegal chokehold on him, and he died. The incident was captured on video by a bystander. Michael Brown, a teenager, was shot and killed by police officer Darren Wilson, after he was accused of stealing, I think it was some type of cigars at a convenience store. He was approached by the police officer. Again, there was an altercation, and Michael Brown was shot and killed. It has been reported and seen on video that he lay in the street for more than 4 hours for all to see the handiwork of this particular policeman. The Black Lives Matter movement continues to play a prominent role in demonstrations against police brutality, both here and internationally, particularly in Canada and also in Europe. Black Lives Matter movement has had plenty of given plenty of attention to other matters, and perhaps some of these names sound familiar to you, but the killings of Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, 12-year-old Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor in her own home, and George Floyd. So that's just to give you a little background about the Black Lives Matter movement. I think there's a lot of misconception about what the movement is and what their intentions are, and it's helpful to hear about their beginnings and what their stated mission is. So how do we care for the souls of Black folks in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement? So I want to share with you that last year during it wasn't in 2020, 2019, during the convention, a woman called me over, and she was from one of our rural congregations. And she said to me, "I want you to know that we don't have a problem with racism in our church." And I said, "You don't?" And she said, "No, we don't have any Black people." And that statement got me to thinking, and I said, I wonder if she really realizes what she just said, because the implication is that if we did have Black people, then sounded like what she was saying was somehow racism would be present, would be invoked in some way. And then that further got me to thinking about how Black skin in this country has been criminalized and demonized. And so if you are Black and your skin is seen as a weapon, you will never be seen as unarmed. You will always be seen as a danger somehow. So when Black people are seen as the problem the problem is always associated with being Black. And so if we are to give spiritual care, we must help everyone, including Black people, stop seeing them as America's problem. Black people have had to live with that far too long. In order for our church to be attentive to spiritual care and the needs of African Americans, attention must be given to the ways that African Americans experience the assault on their bodies, on their very existence. It simply must be acknowledged. Driving while Black, shopping while Black, sleeping in a dormitory while Black, renting an Airbnb while Black. These are things that Black people live with every day. From a personal perspective, I can tell you that when we go shopping, I'm always rather annoyed when people ask me if I want a receipt. Of course I want a receipt, but my reason for wanting a receipt might be different than your reason. We teach our youngsters and our families, always get your receipt, because there's a better than a good chance, excuse me, that you could be stopped, accused of stealing. You need your receipt. It's a self-defense mechanism. The things that I just mentioned, driving while Black, I'm sure almost everyone here has heard of the peril associated with driving, particularly in certain parts of town, while Black. Sleeping in a dormitory. I don't know if you know the story about the young lady that was at the college that she attends, a Black young lady. She had been studying, she got tired, she fell asleep, and in the dorm, in the common area, and someone called the police on her and said she had no business being there. She looked suspicious. So what this leads to is that we as Black people are always having to create our own spaces, safe spaces, because there aren't enough of those safe spaces out there for us in, in most places. Again, whether it's shopping, whether it's restaurants, whether it's at university, whatever it is. But I believe that spiritual care can be done in such a way that it speaks to the ways that we as community, as beloved community, can create those safe spaces and break new ground and advocate for equitable life for everyone concerned. And I think what might be helpful is if we try to understand the depth of violence happening to Black people in our communities every day. And this understanding of care, which includes expressing concern, easing anxiety, and reducing suffering, this work connects us by showing a willingness on our part and a capacity to connect with people we may not have connected with before. And maybe we need to create those spaces again for social, what I call social cohesion. Until this shift in willingness takes place, a mutual understanding and partnerships will not be possible. So I really have two questions I'd like to pose for all of us to think about. And I have to tell you, when I ask questions, I don't necessarily say I have all the answers, because I do like to engage with you and hear what you have to say. So Black lives are a beautiful part of God's creation and make up an essential and beautiful part of the body of Christ, like everyone else. So again, when we say Black Lives Matter, it does not mean only Black Lives Matter, or that they matter more than anyone else's. there is the feeling in the Black community that we say Black Lives Matter because they have not mattered in the past. So I would be interested in hearing what your reactions are, and this is a safe space. I would like to hear what your reactions are when you hear Black Lives Matter.
I'd like to respond.
Thank you.
Over these last several years, I have regret that I did not feel a part, that I myself was not a part of Black Lives Matter. It made me think of, I remember going to a Cardinals game, I think it was back in 2015. And there were about 6 individuals representing Black Lives Matter. It's kind of one of the first times I'd seen a rally, protest, march outside of the car of the stadium as people were leaving the game. And there was a white person this man who came and grabbed one of the Black Lives Matter signs from one of the people and just sort of started walking off with it. And the number of people that were there was no violence that occurred except the violence to stealing the sign from the young man who was carrying it. And I look back on that and just think how I stood on the sideline and just didn't think this was something that was affecting me. And I have a different perspective of it now. This is human rights, human dignity for everyone. And hope I can make a difference.
Anyone else? Rita.
Me, when I hear Black Lives Matter, my answer when somebody will say anything is what you've said. It's not that only Black Lives Matter, but at this point in our time, sorry, George, he hates when you say point in time or point. You always you should take care of what needs to be addressed at that moment. And at this moment, we need to be taking care and looking out for Black lives. So it's not that they only matter, but this is where we should be putting all our attention right now. That's my answer, is that it's not the word only. It's not only, but it's what's most necessary right now.
I think what is different about the Black Lives Matter movement is that over the past, I'd say, couple of decades, is that things have happened. There have been killings, either by the police or other people, and we, not just Black people, but concerned people have mobilized around a moment. And then eventually that kind of fades away. And then something else happens and we mobilize around that moment. And then that kind of fades away. But the Black Lives Matter movement has sustained since 2013. And I think that speaks to the fatigue of Black people in this country. Of, I was looking at a movie the other day, Network. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. I love that one line in the movie: "We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore." And that's kind of what it reminds me of is, we need for you to understand we're human. We have the same frailties that you have. We have the same joys that you have. We have same responsibilities and accountabilities that you have. We're people, just like you. And so um, I think that this has, to me, been the most sustaining presence since the civil rights movement in terms of the Black community. So I'm not quite, well, that's another topic. I do know how it got demonized, but that's a whole other topic. But I'd be interested in hearing other people's, and again, this is a safe space. Believe me, I've heard it all. Um, and you don't live as long as I have as a Black person in this country without hearing a lot of things. So um, other reactions to that question?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay. When I hear the Black Lives Matter, people have a right to pursue this as a kind of overall feeling, an overall slogan or whatever. But I instinctively react by saying, well, okay, what specific policy changes do you want? In other words, if I ask you, name let's say the one or two policy changes that you'd like to see to implement Black Lives Matter, then what would it be?
Well, Gary, I think the best way I can answer that is that you're coming at it from a perspective that a lot of people are, well, what, in fact, I've had people ask me, well, what do you want?
Yeah.
And the answer to the question doesn't have anything to do with policy. The answer to the question is that we want to be treated as humanely as everyone else. It's a matter of humanity, not so much policy. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. We're asking to be treated as humanely as everyone else. I think we all know that simply instituting policy does not change people's hearts, and it does not change people's behavior. Um, and so we're trying to be human beings and being in dialogue and in relationship with other human beings. And I think that's where it gets tripped up, is that the misunderstanding of yeah, there are some laws that need to be changed. There are some systems that need to be frankly addressed and reimagined, but we're talking about an issue of humanity here. And I think maybe if people would look at it that way, they could understand it a little bit better.
Hey, Suge, I've got a comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think one of the speeches I heard that put it in context that really connected for me was Barack Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention. And I recommend that speech for everyone to read in its entirety because it was just spectacular. And it's a real disservice to him to read a single sentence out of it, but I'm going to anyway. He says that Americans of all races joining together to declare, in the face of injustice and brutality at the hands of the state, that Black lives matter, no more, but no less, so that children in this country feels the continuing sting of racism. So I just felt like that sentence just for me encapsulated that it's not that they matter more, but they sure don't matter less. I just felt like that was a powerful statement to me when I heard him say it.
Jan, go ahead.
It's hard to follow Barack Obama in terms of putting my finger on this, but in 1989, I was taking a multicultural counseling class at UMSL, and half of the class was Black and half was white, and the instructor was Black. And he had us do an exercise where we sat around in a circle and said, "What's the first thing you notice when you look in the mirror in the morning?" And to a person, the Black people said, "My black skin." And to a person, the white people said, "My hair was messed up. I didn't have earrings that matched." Um, it was a real awakening for me. And I thought, all of us in the class were on board. This was in 1989. And I thought then that, yeah, this is how we do it, one person at a time. I was working in a school. I had a lot of contact with Black and white kids. I thought, we'll do it. We'll do it. But we didn't do it. And we need something that states specifically what the problem is, not just your skin is Black, my skin is white, but Black skin is equally blessed by God as white skin, and it has to be very overt. It doesn't work slowly like I had hoped. So that's it. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Suge.
Well, and I would like for everyone here to know that I agree, we can talk about policy, we can talk about, a lot of things, but it all comes back to the gospel for me. And what we are called to do as Christians and specifically as Episcopalians in our baptismal covenant. I read the baptismal covenant every day because I never want to forget what I promised to do and what we are all called to do when we stand there and say, "I will," with God's help. We do need God's help. I think when I have fallen down the rabbit hole, it has been at times when I have let my personal or worldly feelings supersede my responsibility as a Christian. And that's easy to do. I will never tell anyone I don't get angry or that I don't get my feelings hurt or whatever, because I do. I'm a human being. I have the same feelings that everybody else has, but it's how it's those times that I have to sit back and look at myself and say, um, how how could I have thought about this in a better way, in a more Christian way, in a more loving way, in a way that makes all of us part of that beloved community that particularly our presiding bishop talks about all the time. So in chapter 6 of Michael, we hear these words. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? So, in that context, I would like for all of us to think about what we can do to attend to the spiritual lives of people, and not just Black people, people involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, and understand really what it is that, as Gary asked, what it is that folks are asking for, what they would like to see happen. This is a conversation that would take days and days and days. We would have to look at legal systems, we would have to look at police systems, we would have to look at education systems. I hold the firm belief that we are not educated in this country, that we are indoctrinated. And we are indoctrinated to what people in power want us to know and believe. And um, and so you will hear during my sermon some talk about why Black History Month and whether or not it's still needed. But it is a multifaceted discussion, and I really just wanted to give a little capsule of what Black Lives Matter is about because I think it is grossly misunderstood. It is also very vulnerable to people who come in and purport to be Black Lives Matter, and they are not. They are agitators who have attached themselves to the movement and to demonstrations, who do things that always manage to get onto the news. And then that's the perception that people have of Black Lives Matter. And indeed, that is not why the organization was formed, and it's not the mission of the group. So I would just encourage all of us to think more compassionately about what we can do as Christians, as members of beloved community, to care for everyone when they feel disenfranchised, hurt, um, oppressed. What is our responsibility as Christians? What is our responsibility as human beings? Any response to that?
I thought of a time when I was headed toward church, going down Mason Avenue, and a policeman pulled out a young guy in a police car and followed me. So I pulled up into the church, and he pulled up into the church. And he told me that I was going 5 now, and I was following traffic also. So he said I was going 5 miles over the speed limit. And came out, Mark Minot came out and just stood there. He didn't say a word. He just stood there. So I'm doing my yes, sir, and no, sir, and showing my driver's license and all that kind of stuff. And Mark just, he changes from one foot to the next foot, and he just stood there. Well, the thing is, I was not speeding. And this guy apparently had just gotten his license to be a policeman or whatever. But he realized that, he couldn't charge me with anything. And Mark didn't move. Mark just stood. He didn't say a word. He just stood there and watched. And finally, the guy said, well, okay, I'm going to give you a warning this time. And left. And I'll never forget it because no words were exchanged except this guy was talking and I just listened to whatever he had to say. I haven't even seen him on the street again. But it was Mark coming.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting point in that, first of all, I'm not from St. Louis, and I learned very quickly what parts of town I had to be real careful in driving around. And to this day, I do that. The other thing is that sometimes people ask, well, again, what do you want or what can we do? Well, sometimes it's something simple like what you say Mark did. Sometimes it's when groups of white people are sitting around, let's say at a restaurant or in someone's home, and someone says something overtly racist or discriminatory. And it's my opinion that if everybody just sits there and doesn't say anything, that whoever said it assumes that everyone is in agreement with what was just said. What is helpful is if someone were to say, that really wasn't very nice, or that's not at all a good thing to be saying, or I don't appreciate that kind of talk or whatever. That goes along, you'd be surprised how far that goes to changing some minds, to changing the way that people behave, because maybe next time that person won't feel so safe saying, see, there's a safety issue there. You feel safe saying this around you. But if Suge's in the room or Carolyn's in the room or somebody, I better not say that. I even had someone, I was the only Black person in this group. I was a group I work with. And something really racist was said. And I looked at the guy that said it and I said, do you see me here? Do you know that what you just said is really racist? Did you not understand? Do you understand that I'm Black? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, but you're not like the rest of those Blacks. And so that was me starting to understand too, that there's I guess there's categories. I don't know. You know, so again, it all comes down to the gospel for me. All comes down to the gospel and our responsibility as Christians and as human beings. So, Amy, how much time do we have? I'm not sure how much.
We were going to cut off at 10:30, so you could transition to the service. So 6 more minutes.
Okay, so what I really want to say above everything else is how much I appreciate your willingness to sit and listen, to perhaps learn, to be honest about your feelings, to ask honest questions, because I believe in communication. I believe in dialogue. I believe in holding each other accountable. And that works both ways. And, you know, it's just such a joy to be here and hear your thoughts, maybe hear some of your fears, maybe hear some of your suggestions about how we can move forward in dialogue, how we can commune. It's a little hard these days. I mean, Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. We've all become zombies, and it's a little harder, but you know what? It's made it easier in some regards too, because I found sometimes that people will say things on Zoom that they might feel uncomfortable saying in person in a room. So I see both sides of it. It's really good, but I do want you all to know that I'm a person that you can reach out to with questions, with suggestions, with, you know, I don't like that. I don't like that. You said that. I don't, that's okay. That's, you know, that's why we're all here. We're all here for each other. And I really would like to believe that. So does anybody have anything they'd like to say before we close out?
Reverend,
Yeah.
Judy Maloney. As I'm listening to this, and I've been to different meetings and get-togethers, and it is one person at a time, one interaction at a time, it seems, and that seems awfully slow, but that is how it normally changes the people that are in the interaction. I like the gatherings we have where we, you know, gather with black, white, and then we express our story or whatever. I was fortunate in being a nurse in the 50s, late 50s and 60s. And I didn't know what segregation was because it was so much around me and didn't recognize it. But working in a hospital, which was segregated as well, working in a hospital, I learned, and I came to learn, we're all the same. We're all the same. And that's in the years that people believed that black blood was different than white blood. And, you know, I mean, it was really, you know, Martin Luther King, though, was on his way in enlightening people. But I feel very fortunate. And it was for me, one person working with a black nurse and taking care of black patients and white patients, you know, there was not a difference.
Sure.
And I was fortunate to learn that young.
Well, I will just make one remark, and I know we're close to closing, but you made an interesting comment about it taking time. And I have to tell you, from our perspective, it's already been over 400 years.
Yeah.
And so how much time does it take?
Yeah.
And so I think that if we can understand each other's perspectives and sensitivities, that we can have more meaningful dialogue about it. But I do have to say that it's been over 400 years. And this constant thing of be patient, it takes time. How much time does it take? So
Yeah.
yeah, we need to all think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today and sharing your thoughts and explanation of Black Lives Matter and reminding us of our spiritual, work that we need to do in this space.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you queued up the sermon so we can just migrate, virtually over to the service here shortly. So thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate
And
it.
thank you all so much for inviting me in. Thank you.
Good to have you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.